The beach cave. You know how small coastal towns always come with ghost stories? This one's mine. I grew up in a place where the ocean didn't just kiss the shore, it devoured it. Every few hours, the tide surged in with a roar, swallowing whole stretches of sand. And carved into the cliffs were the tide caves. Dark, dripping mouths yawning into the rock, daring you to step inside. The older kids has dared each other to go in. Nothing down there but crabs and seaweed, they'd say, laughing as they shoved each other toward the shadows. But my cousin, he never laughed. He said caves were different from houses, from woods, from any other haunted place. Caves remember what you leave behind. It was the summer we all thought we were invincible. Sunburns peeling on our shoulders, salt drying our hair stiff, the taste of soda and cheap chips on our tongues. And then there was that group of teens, locals, older than me, who decided to make a point, to prove my cousin's warning was nothing more than superstition. They waited until low tide, when the water had pulled back like a curtain. The entrance to the biggest cave loomed wide enough to swallow a truck. Inside, it was cool and damp, echoing with drips and the restless hush of waves rolling deeper in. They brought flashlights, snacks, even a speaker blasting some tinny pop song. They were going to spend the night, make it a joke, a story to brag about when school started again. But when I saw them go in, something gnawed at me. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. The way the air around the cave mouth felt heavy, pressing in like a warning. I swear I heard the ocean whisper, not in the language of water, but something closer, something human. I didn't follow them. God, no. I went home, tried to sleep, and in the middle of the night, I dreamed of bones arranged in spirals, wet and shining, lit by the beam of a flashlight that wasn't mine. When I woke up, the tide was high, slamming against the rocks with a fury that shook the windows. And I knew, though I didn't want to, that something in that cave had remembered it. That's how it started. The last summer, the tide caves were just a game. The last summer before they became hungry. They found it on a hot July afternoon, when the sun was so unforgiving it seemed to peel the skin right off your back. The cave yawned open like it had been waiting for them, a dark mouth carved into the cliff. The kind of place that pulled at your curiosity, even as your gut whispered, don't. Inside, the air was damp and cool. Their laughter echoed off the walls, loud and reckless, the way only teenagers can laugh when they think the world can't touch them. One of them swung his flashlight beam across the walls, and that's when they saw it. Bones, not scattered, not random, arranged, spirals stretching across the sand, each piece bleached pale and polished smooth by time. Ribs curved into arcs, skulls crowned the circles like punctuation marks. They thought it was hilarious. Took selfies, crouching beside the spirals with mock horror, hands on cheeks, tongues out. They posted it to their feeds before the cave had even finished swallowing the signal. Proof the cave people exist, one of them joked. Another tossed a femur like a football, not noticing the way it snapped brittle against the wall and landed back in the sand, exactly where it had been before. None of them noticed the tide, not at first. The water crawled in slow, slick as oil, sliding across the sand in thin black sheets. It filled the gaps in the spiral until the bones gleamed under the surface, floating like pale fish trapped in glass. By the time they looked back toward the entrance, the sunlight was gone. What had been a gaping arch just minutes earlier was now different. A flat wall of rock, seamless and solid, as if no opening had ever existed. One of the girls screamed. Another rushed forward, slamming his fists against the stone until his knuckles bled. Nothing. They turned their flashlights around the cave, searching for another way out, but the beams caught things that shouldn't have been there. A new spiral forming on the far side of the chamber. Wet bones. Fresh ones. One still wore a shoe. Panic set in. The speaker was dropped, music skipping, then cutting off altogether. Phones lit the cave with frantic blue glow as they tried to call for help. No signal. Just static, hissing from the speakers as if the cave itself was breathing into the line. That's when the whispers began. At first, it was just the drip of water, the shuffle of waves deeper in the dark. But then, clearer. A voice, low and wet, rising from the tide. It called their names, each of them, one by one, echoing back from the stone. The cave remembered, and as the water rose to their knees, then to their waists, they realized the spirals weren't finished. They were invitations, And the cave was waiting to write their bones into the story next. Panic hit fast. The kind of panic that makes your chest feel too small for air, that makes the skin on your back prickle as though unseen hands are reaching for you. They threw themselves at the rock, palms smacking, nails dragging, the sound sharp against the cavern's echo. Fists pounded until blood streaked down the stone. Nothing gave. The wall was unmoving, cold, final. Someone dropped their phone, the glow spinning on the wet floor. Another boy scooped it up, jabbing at the screen with trembling fingers, but the bars were gone. No signal, just a hiss like surf breaking on sand, except it was coming from the speaker itself. A hiss that grew into voices. At first, they were soft, like whispers curling around the ear, but soon they were chanting, a rhythm, steady as the tide. The words didn't make sense, not exactly, but the cadence was unmistakable. An invitation, a summons. One kid, eyes wide and wild, stumbled toward the spiral of bones. "They're talking to us," he gasped. "They're telling us what to do." He knelt, pressing his ear close, like the bones themselves were a conch shell carrying the ocean's voice. Then he started laughing. Loud, shrill, wrong. The others screamed at him to stop, to get up, but he only traced his finger along the spiral's edge, whispering the chant back to the cave. That was when the water surged, not creeping anymore, but rushing, an icy tide slamming against their legs, lifting them off their feet. Flashlights bobbed and spun, beams jittering across the stone ceiling like frantic spotlights. One by one, the lights began to die. The first fizzled out with a weak sputter. The second blinked off as if a hand had pinched the bulb. Phones dimmed, screens going black, until the only glow left was from the spiral itself. Bones wet and gleaming, lit from nowhere, shining like pale lanterns in the dark. They clawed for each other, hands slipping in the rising water. A girl tried to climb onto the rocks, pulling herself up against the jagged wall, but the stone was slick. Her scream cut off as she vanished beneath the surface, bubbles bursting once, twice, then nothing. The cave filled with silence. Not the silence of peace, but of waiting. A heavy, pressing quiet that made the heart hammer louder just to fill the void. And in that silence, the cave swallowed them whole, one by one. Some dragged under by unseen grips, some pulled toward the spiral as if magnetized, some simply vanishing into the black. The last sound was a single phone buzzing with a half-finished video, recording shaky frames of water, bone, and shadow. It caught their final screams. Then the feed cut, and when the tide rolled back hours later, the cave was empty again. Empty, except the spiral. And now it had new bones, still dripping, still fresh, woven into the story that would never stop writing itself. Parents searched. Police dragged the coastline with nets and dogs, boats circling the cliffs day after day until the engines grew tired and the officers' faces hardened into something close to defeat. Divers went down into the black water, flashlights cutting through kelp forests and shifting sand, but they came back shaking their heads. Nothing. Not a shoe, not a thread of fabric, not a single piece of proof that the kids had ever set foot in that cave. The town held vigils. Candles guttered in the salty wind. Mothers stood at the shoreline, clutching photos already warped by damp air, staring at the waves like the ocean owed them an answer. Fathers paced the rocks with fists stuffed in their pockets, faces carved into grim masks, fighting the urge to scream at the tide itself. After weeks bled into months, the police offered their theory. They ran away. Teenagers, impulsive, restless, they must have caught a ride out of town, left behind their families and lives to chase freedom. Some people wanted to believe that, needed to. It was easier than the alternative, easier than admitting the sea could take and never give back. But the parents didn't buy it. Not for a second. They knew. They could feel it every time the tide drew in, every time it licked higher on the rocks than it should, every time the cave sighed with the sound of waves rushing through stone throats. Their children were down there, trapped, stolen, remembered. The town changed. Kids stopped daring each other to go into the caves. No more late-night games, no more dares scrawled in notebooks. Teachers warned students to stay clear of the cliffs. Even fishermen, the stubborn kind who never feared a storm, refused to drop anchor near that stretch of coast. They swore the water was different there, colder, heavier, as if it was holding something just beneath the surface. And me? I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the dream I'd had before the news broke. The spiral of bones lit by a flashlight that wasn't mine. I told myself it was coincidence, just a child's imagination. But sometimes, lying awake at night, I swore I could still hear it, the chant. Faint, muffled, rising through the floorboards of my room like the sea itself was whispering up through the ground. Time dulled the panic, the rumors, but it didn't erase them. The caves were boarded off, the path to the tide pools collapsed with warning signs hammered into the earth. Danger, unstable cliffs. But everyone in town knew the truth. The cliffs weren't unstable. The danger wasn't falling rocks. The danger was memory. And even as the years dragged on, the parents never stopped watching. On stormy nights, you'd see them standing by the railing at the overlook, staring into the froth and spray with eyes that refused to blink, waiting, as though one day, when the tide receded lower than ever before, the caves would open their mouths again. And maybe, just maybe, they'd get their answer. Then came winter. The storms battered the coast so hard, the sea itself seemed to retreat in exhaustion. And one morning when the town woke, the tide had pulled back lower than anyone had ever seen. The rocks glistened like black glass, the sand stretched wide, and there, gaping at the base of the cliff, was the cave. People gathered at the overlook, whispering, pointing. Some crossed the rocks and peered inside, though none dared step over the threshold. And what they saw froze the town in silence. The spirals were still there. Only this time, they weren't weathered bones bleached by decades of salt and spray. These were new, fresh. Bones that still clung to scraps of fabric, denim, polyester sneakers frayed with the sea's touch. Every spiral told the same story, every curve another piece of proof. And in the center of the largest circle lay a phone, screen cracked, still flickering faintly with the last video recorded. The screams cut short by water, by silence. Parents collapsed into the sand, sobbing, clutching what they could recognize. Laces, bracelets, hair ties. The police said nothing. What could they say? The cave had given back the children, but not the way anyone prayed for. It had written their memory into stone, sealed in saltwater ink. I didn't go down there, I couldn't. I stood on the overlook, my cousin beside me, the cold air cutting through our jackets. He didn't look surprised. Not at all. He just said almost gently, "Told you. Caves remember." That night I couldn't sleep. The chant was louder now, echoing under my skin. And I understood. This wasn't the end. The tide would rise again, and when it did, the cave would close its mouth, hungry as ever, waiting for the next group of kids to think they were braver than the sea. And maybe one day it'll be you. So let me ask you, next time you find a cave on the beach, when the tide's rising and the air feels too still, will you go inside? Or will you keep walking before it decides it wants you to? Remember, if you like this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling tales, and share this with someone who thinks they'd be brave enough to step into the dark. Thank you for listening and watching. Another story is waiting for you on your screen. I'll see you back here tomorrow. The Campsite Radio. I'll never forget that summer night, the kind where the woods feel alive, even when nothing's moving. The trees stood like black pillars against the sky, and the silence was so thick it clung to your skin, heavier than the humid air. Nights like that don't feel natural, they feel staged, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something. We were just a family on a weekend getaway. My wife wanted an escape from the city. The kids wanted s'mores and ghost stories. And me, I just wanted quiet. I'd been carrying too much noise inside my head. Bills piling up, deadlines breathing down my neck, a marriage stretched so thin you could almost hear it tearing. I thought maybe a few nights under the stars would heal something, or at least buy us a little time. The cabin was small, the kind that smelled like pine and mildew. Dust coated everything, and the walls held the dampness of a place that hadn't seen a real fire in years. The kids ran through it like explorers, claiming bunks and giggling about the bats they swore were living in the rafters. My wife unpacked groceries, muttering about how the fridge hummed louder than the city we'd left behind. Then, in the cabin's storage trunk, I found it, an old transistor radio. Dusty, battered, heavier than it looked. It fit awkwardly in my hand, its metal cracked with age, knobs stiff as if frozen mid-turn. I assumed it was broken, some relic left behind by campers who'd come and gone decades before us. Still, curiosity's a stubborn itch. That night, when the fire had burned down to glowing coals and the kids were tucked away, I set the radio on the porch. The forest was dark enough to feel endless, and I wanted to hear something, anything, besides the sound of my own breathing. I turned the dial, expecting nothing but static. And at first, that's all I got, just the hiss and pop of dead air. But then beneath it, a sound began to form. Soft, strange, like voices humming a campfire song I almost remembered from childhood. It should have comforted me. Instead, my skin prickled, because the song wasn't just familiar. It sounded like it was being sung for us, for me. And in that moment, with the woods pressing close and the night listening in, I realized the strangest things have a way of working when they shouldn't. And sometimes, they don't work for you at all. They work for whatever's waiting on the other side. It started with a crackle, just static at first, a soft hiss that melted into the night. The kids leaned closer, curious. Then, clear as a bell, a melody broke through, an old camp song. The kind I hadn't heard since my grandfather sang it by firelight. I forced a laugh, nervous and brittle, told the kids it must be some lucky signal bouncing off the hills. But deep down, I knew better. I hadn't put batteries in, the dial wasn't even turned all the way. That radio should have been as dead as the ashes in our fire. Still, it kept playing. The longer it sang, the more the air seemed to shift. The fire burned lower, shadows stretched longer, and the night grew heavy. The voices multiplied, first one, then two, then a chorus of unseen throats. They sang, then they laughed, then they talked, like a gathering of people just beyond the trees, except their voices carried a weight, brittle and hollow, like words pulled from the bottom of a well. I wanted to shut it off, smash it against the porch rail, but something in me froze, a primal fear that if I touched it, I'd be joining the conversation. And then came the moment that froze my marrow. The radio said my daughter's name, not slurred, not distorted, clear, precise, like someone standing behind her, whispering it into a microphone. She jerked back, eyes wide. "Daddy, how did it know?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Because the next second, it spoke again. My wife's name. My son's. Finally. Mine. And then the voices weren't just calling us. They were describing us. He's leaning forward. She's shivering. They're all listening now. Every word timed perfectly to our movements. Each description a mirror of what we were doing in real time, as if the static was watching from the dark. My wife's hand found mine, cold, trembling. "Turn it off." I twisted the knob hard. Nothing. The dial spun freely, but the voices didn't stop. If anything, they grew sharper, like they knew I was trying to silence them. "They don't want to hear. He's trying to stop us. Don't let them leave." The kids began to cry. I pulled them close, muttering it was just a glitch, just some weird broadcast bleeding through the air. But my words sounded like lies even to me, because the fire sputtered out right then. No wind, no rain, just gone, snuffed like a candle. And in the sudden darkness, the radio glowed faint green, casting enough light to see every terrified face around me. That's when the voices started laughing again. Not playful, not kind, a laughter that scraped the inside of your skull and left splinters. And over the noise, a new voice rose, low, rough. It said 5 words that hollowed me out. "We've been waiting for you." The voices swelled until they weren't voices anymore. They became something bigger, like a storm caught inside the radio, every word pressed against the speaker, clawing to get out. Our names screamed in unison, twisted into sounds that no throat on earth could form. It was as if the forest itself had found a tongue. The lantern sputtered, throwing wild shadows across the cabin wall. Outside, the trees swayed violently, though the air was still, bending low as if bowing to something we couldn't see. My chest clamped tight, every breath razor sharp. Then came the breaking point. My son screamed, his voice so raw it rattled my bones. He tore into the dark, legs pumping, blind with terror. My wife grabbed our youngest, clutching her against her chest like the girl might vanish if she let go. And me? I did the only thing I could think to do. I lunged for the radio. The handle scorched my palm. Not heat, not cold. Something worse. It burned like ice, searing straight through to the bone. My skin stuck, blistering instantly. The static roared, splitting my head in two, and underneath it all, the voices layered, piling on top of one another, hissing demands I couldn't understand. I swung it against the rocks by the fire pit. Sparks burst, but the box didn't crack. I slammed it again and again until my arms went numb. Still it held. Still it pulsed, thudding in my grip like a living heart, each beat stronger, hungrier, as though it was feeding on me. The ground shook, not violently, but with the subtle rhythm of something rising. Dirt shifted, roots snapping beneath the soil. The laughter inside the radio fractured into shrieks, high-pitched, needle-thin, drilling into my skull. Then, for one split-second silence, the radio spoke, a single voice cutting through the chaos, deeper, closer. We are here. Every lantern, every candle, every coal of the fire snuffed out in unison. Blackness swallowed us whole. My wife sobbed in the dark, whispering my name. My son's cries vanished into the trees, too far, too fast. And then the radio began to describe us again. She's clutching the child. He's holding the box. The boy is lost. It was narrating our nightmare in real time, stripping us of any illusion of escape. Each word bound us tighter, like invisible ropes drawing us into the story it wanted to tell. I knew then this wasn't about noise, or signals, or some freak accident of static. This was a beacon, a door. Something on the other side had been waiting for someone, anyone foolish enough to listen. And I had listened. So I made a choice. My blood smeared the casing where my hand stuck. I lifted the radio high, above my head, and screamed louder than I'd ever screamed in my life as I hurled it into the fire pit. It hit the stones with a shattering boom that wasn't metal, wasn't wood. It sounded like glass breaking across miles of distance. And in that instant, the forest answered back. We didn't pack. We didn't gather our things. We didn't even shut the cabin door. We just ran. My wife clutching our daughter, me dragging my son's sleeve until he found his footing, all of us stumbling down the trail like prey in full flight. Branches tore at our skin, whipping welts across our faces and arms. The ground tilted under our boots, mud sucking at our heels, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. Behind us, in the distance, the static carried. Not loud, not close, just there. A faint hiss clinging to the silence between heartbeats, following no matter how far we ran. Every pause in our breath filled with its whisper, as if the night itself had learned our names. By dawn, we burst out of the tree line, collapsed in front of the ranger station, a mess of mud, sweat, and trembling limbs. My son clung to my leg like he was still afraid the ground might open beneath him. My wife shook so hard she couldn't speak. The ranger blinked at us, coffee mug in hand, eyes narrowing as though he couldn't decide whether to call for a medic or the sheriff. "What happened out there?" he asked. But none of us answered, not a word. Because how do you explain that a dead radio had come alive and narrated your every move? That the voices of strangers who had no right to exist had laughed at you from the dark? Anything I said would have sounded like madness, and maybe it was. We drove home that morning. Silence heavy in the car. No one argued, no one laughed, no one even asked for music. We just sat there, each trapped in our own private replay of the night, waiting for the static to seep back in. Days later, the ranger called, said he and a deputy had gone back up to check the site. He told me the tents were still there, though shredded as if a storm had ripped through. The fire pit drowned in rainwater. Our food scattered, gnawed by animals. And the radio? I asked before I could stop myself. He hesitated. I heard the faint rattle of his breath through the phone. Then he said it. "It's still there, sitting on the log where you left it." I wanted to believe him wrong. Wanted to tell myself it had burned, broken, been buried. But no. He said it sat there exactly as we'd left it, casing intact, no batteries inside. And when he leaned closer just to see, he swore he heard it, still hissing. That faint whisper of static rising out of nothing, like a secret waiting for another fool to listen. And in that moment, I knew the truth. We hadn't escaped it. Not really. Because once something learns your name, it never forgets. The ranger swore up and down it was tuned to nothing, a dead frequency. Just static. He said he'd even turned the knob, shifted the dial back and forth across the band. Still the same hiss, soft and endless, like wind caught in a bottle. Nothing more. But then he leaned closer, and that's when it spoke. Not in a song this time, not even in laughter, just a single word, his name. Whispered so faint it might have been imagination, but too sharp, too precise to mistake. He told me he dropped the thing right then and there, stumbled back like it had bitten him. The deputy wouldn't go near it after that. They packed up fast, left the site as it was, radio still sitting on the log, whispering into the trees. I haven't slept well since. When the house grows quiet and the hum of the fridge dies down, I swear I hear it in the walls, a faint hiss. Sometimes, if I'm tired enough, I imagine it shaping itself into syllables, my name curling through the dark like smoke. I don't tell my wife. She already flinches at sudden noises, already double checks the locks every night. The kids don't camp anymore. They won't even light sparklers in the backyard. Something broke in us that night, something the woods took and never gave back. And me? I've stopped pretending I can explain it. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things just exist, waiting for the right moment, the right listener. So now I'll ask you, if you're ever deep in the woods and an old radio begins to hum, not with music, not with news, but with your name, will you lean closer, curious? Or will you run before it learns the sound of your heartbeat? Because once it does, there's no turning the dial back. If this story made your skin crawl, do me a favor, like this video to help it reach more people, and subscribe so you don't miss the next nightmare waiting in the dark. Share it with someone who loves a good scare, or someone who thinks they're too brave for campfire tales. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and remember, there's another story waiting for you on the screen right now. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Heat wave sirens. It was the hottest July on record. The kind of heat that clung to you like a wet blanket, that made every breath feel like you were inhaling through a furnace vent. Asphalt shimmered, windows warped the air. Even the bugs had gone quiet, wings too heavy with the weight of the heat. Most folks in town learned to live with it. Old tricks, bowls of ice in front of fans, wet towels draped across shoulders, kids splashing in hoses till the water turned lukewarm. But the nights offered no mercy. Midnight felt like noon in a locked attic, and the silence pressed against you until you couldn't tell if the sweat on your neck was yours or someone else's breath. That's where I was. Porch light buzzing, cigarette glowing between my fingers, a broken AC inside waiting like a coffin. I thought I'd gotten used to the quiet, but then I heard it. Sirens, not the kind you know. Not police, not fire, not ambulance. These weren't alarms that rose and fell, begging for urgency. They were steady, long, hollow. A flat line stretched across the sky as though the heavens had leaned down just to wail into our bones. I wasn't the only one. Doors creaked open up and down the block. Neighbors shuffled out in pajamas and sweat-stained undershirts, squinting into the dark. A few whispered maybe the county's testing an emergency system. Maybe it's the power grid straining. But you could tell they didn't believe it. Not really, because the sound wasn't coming from speakers. It wasn't echoing off buildings. It was above, hanging, stretching, vibrating the air in a way that rattled the fillings in your teeth. The dogs knew it too. They howled, then went silent, tails between legs. A baby down the street started wailing, and that sound, raw, human, terrified, fit the night better than anything else. And then, as suddenly as they began, the sirens stopped. You'd think silence would be a relief, but it wasn't. It was worse, because when the sound drained away, it left something behind. A heaviness, like the air itself had been listening and was waiting. That was the first night, and deep down we all knew the heat wasn't the worst thing coming. The next night they came again, same time, same sound. By then, people were making theories, military exercises, atmospheric interference, power grid stress. But old Harris down the street swore he heard voices buried in the noise. Not alarms, screams. I laughed it off at first. Heat makes folks hear things. But then I caught it too. Standing barefoot in the grass, smoke curling from my last cigarette, I swore I could make out words inside the siren. Thin, brittle voices pressed against the noise. Pleading, like someone begging through glass a mile thick. By the third night, the whole town was unraveling. No one slept. Parents kept kids awake with board games and flashlights, pretending it was fun. Dogs whined in corners. People drank just to pass out, but the sirens woke them anyway. And it wasn't just noise anymore. Streetlights began flickering when the sound rose. Radios turned themselves on, hissing static in rhythm with the sirens. Even unplugged sets, long dead, buzzed back to life, humming like they were being tuned by invisible hands. That's when fear became ritual. Some swore you had to open your door when it started, or it would scratch to get in. Others claimed closing your eyes kept you safe, that looking up at the sky meant the sirens would see you. But every night, curiosity pulled us outside. Always outside. even the ones who swore they'd resist. Within minutes, they were on their porches, staring at the sky as if hypnotized. On the seventh night, the sirens changed. They didn't just drone, they bent, wavered, and in those cracks, you could hear it clearer. Screams. Not distant, not muffled, sharp, raw, tearing throat screams. That night, the power grid failed. Air conditioners shut down, lights cut out, and the only thing left was the sky wailing. Houses drowned in pitch black heat, and in the dark, people began to vanish. Doors left open, chairs tipped over, cigarettes still burning on porches. By dawn, 10 houses stood empty, families gone. No struggle, no trace, just silence that settled too neatly, as though the night had fed and was satisfied for now. And yet, the next night, every remaining family still came out when the sirens began. Because once you've heard them, staying inside feels worse. Then came the hottest night yet. The air was red even after the sun went down. The horizon glowed like coals that wouldn't die, and the air tasted of metal. Midnight struck and the sirens wailed, but this time they cracked. What came out wasn't warning tones anymore. It was screaming, real, human. Power grids failed across town. Street lamps blew with soft pops, plunging block after block into darkness. Air conditioners choked out their last rattling breaths. Even the cicadas, the one sound we'd grown used to, cut off mid-chirp as though strangled. The heat pressed in harder than ever, like the air itself wanted to smother us. That's when people started vanishing. I saw it. Not rumors, not whispers. I watched it happen. The Jeffersons' front door swung wide, hinges groaning in the black. They didn't stumble out, didn't look confused. No, they marched. Husband, wife, 2 kids, single file, faces slack, eyes vacant, moving with a precision that made my stomach turn. I shouted their names, ran barefoot into the street, but they didn't turn, didn't hesitate, just walked, into the dark, into nothing. Like the sirens were pulling threads only they could see, tugging them forward with invisible hands. And they weren't the only ones. Across the block, silhouettes poured from homes, one after another, drifting toward the fields beyond town. No screams, no struggle, just silent obedience. I panicked, tried to grab Mrs. Ramirez as she shuffled past, sweat glistening on her brow. But the moment I touched her arm, the siren in my skull split wide open. My ears bled. My head rang like a cracked bell. She tore free with inhuman strength, never breaking her stride. I staggered back, clutching my ears, and saw more of them. Harris, the old man who first said he heard screams. Little Tommy Miller, dragging his stuffed rabbit in the dust. Whole families, their bodies jerking slightly, like marionettes in the hands of something that couldn't see well, but knew the shape of control. And then I felt it, the pull. My legs twitched, my chest tightened. The sound inside the siren found me, my name whispered through the static. A thread looped around my ribs, tugging, urging me to fall in line, to march with the rest. I fought it, dug my nails into my skin, bit my tongue until the taste of copper filled my mouth. Anything to anchor myself. But the heat, the sound, the pressure, it was stronger than thought, stronger than will. One step forward, then another. My body betraying me, my porch shrinking behind me, the dark ahead yawning open, waiting. The only choice left was brutal and clear. Follow them into whatever waited beyond the sirens, or break myself trying not to. Morning brought no answers. The sheriff's office moved fast. Patrol cars lined the streets, blocking intersections, officers standing in the heat with mirrored sunglasses and tight jaws. They told us there had been heat-related evacuations. Said the Jeffersons, the Ramirezes, all of them had been relocated for safety. But no buses ever came, no convoys, no Red Cross tents, just words. Thin, practiced lies that dissolved under the sun. We asked questions. Where were they taken? Why no warning? Why did it only happen at midnight when the sirens came? But every answer was the same. Heat stroke, disorientation, nothing unusual. Go back inside, drink water, keep calm, and yet the houses stood hollow. Lawns brown, toys left scattered, curtains drawn across windows no one looked through. Silence grew thick on the blocks where laughter once lived. Days bled into weeks. The sirens still came, always at midnight, but softer now, like they didn't need to scream. They had already fed. Fewer of us remained, and fewer still dared to step outside. I stopped smoking, not for my lungs, but because the porch felt too exposed, like the night was waiting for me to give it one more chance. That's when the trucks came. Moving vans, glossy with fresh paint, rolled down our streets. Men in uniforms unloaded couches, beds, Bicycles still wrapped in plastic. New families spilled out, smiling, sweating, excited. They waved at the few of us still left, asking nothing about why the neighborhood seemed so cheap, why the houses carried no histories but the paint still smelled fresh. Children darted through sprinklers, mothers planted flowers, fathers hammered fences back into place. They never asked. Never wondered why so many homes had been abandoned in July, why so many names had been crossed out of the school register. To them, the silence was a blessing, a reprieve from city noise, a clean slate. I watched them from my window, blinds tilted just enough to see. Their joy felt wrong, the air around them too still. Every night I waited, knowing it would come for them too. And every midnight, the sirens proved me right. They heard it, the first long hollow cry, and froze. Heads tilted, eyes wide, a shiver passing through their skin though the heat was unbearable. I knew the pattern. First curiosity, then the step onto the porch. I saw it in them already, the pull. And I knew then it was never about us, it was about the town, the heat, the sirens, the cycle, and it was starting over. I left town before the next summer, packed what little I had, shoved it into the trunk, and drove until the rear view showed nothing but horizon. I couldn't take the chance, couldn't stand the thought of hearing that sound again, of feeling that invisible thread tugging at my chest, because the sirens weren't warnings. They weren't mistakes in some system, or echoes bouncing off the valley walls. No, they were invitations, summons. And those who stepped outside, those who lingered just a little too long, they didn't vanish. They were claimed. I tried to start fresh. New apartment, new job. Pretended that the nights were just nights, that heat was just weather. But silence has weight, and when the air is too still, I catch myself listening for something that isn't there. Yet, I still dream about it. Streets lined with dark houses, front doors gaping open like mouths. Figures marching into the starless sky, their faces blank, their footsteps steady, their bodies too obedient. In the dream, I follow too, always one step behind. And when I wake, I'm never sure if I dragged myself back or if the sound let me go. Sometimes I think about the new families that moved in, the kids who ran laughing through sprinklers, the parents painting fences under the blazing sun. I wonder if they lasted a whole year, or if when July came back, their silhouettes joined the procession. The worst part is, I'll never know. Because even now, miles away, I swear sometimes, just at the edge of midnight, I hear it again. A low, steady wail, too faint to be real. And I lie there frozen, waiting to see if it grows louder, waiting to see if it remembers my name. So let me ask you, if you ever hear sirens at midnight with no flashing lights, no fire trucks, no rescue coming, will you step outside to see what's happening? Or will you hide, sweating in the dark, praying the sound doesn't call your name? And if this story unsettled you, if you felt the heat press down or the silence close in, remember to like this video. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you want more stories that peel back the dark and whisper what might be waiting there. Share it with someone who thinks their town is safe, who thinks the night is just night. Thank you for listening, for watching, for walking this road with me. Another story waits for you on your screen right now. I'll see you back here tomorrow, unless the sirens come first. Highways at night are like veins in the body, black rivers pumping loneliness instead of blood. I'd been driving too long, the kind of too long where your eyelids weigh more than your head, and every mile marker looks the same. My coffee was stone cold in the cup holder, my playlist a loop of static and silence. When the fuel light blinked red, I told myself, one more stop. Just one. The station appeared like a mirage. A cracked sign buzzed half dead, neon bleeding the word open into the foggy dark. There were 4 pumps, all empty, the kind of place you don't forget, even though you want to. The parking lot stretched too wide, shadows pooling in places shadows shouldn't have been. Inside, the convenience store felt abandoned. A single attendant sat slumped behind the counter, face ghostly under the fluorescent hum, flipping through a magazine with pages yellowed like old teeth. He didn't look up when I walked past him toward the restroom. Maybe he didn't want to. The door creaked like it had bones. The smell hit me first. Bleach, rust, something sour threaded beneath. A single flickering bulb lit the room, too dim to chase away the shadows. Graffiti coated the stalls. Not the usual call Jenny or Adelas. For a good time, dial no. This was darker. Words clawed into the paint like fingernail scratches. Pleas for help, names, dates, layers thick enough to cover decades. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s. One said, "Don't stop here after dark." Another, "He's still here." I should have left. Any sane man would have. But curiosity has teeth, and mine sank in deep. I traced my fingers along the jagged lines, ink and scratches overlapping, desperate voices fossilized on porcelain walls. And then I froze, because carved into the back of the last stall, letters deep and unmistakable, was handwriting I recognized. My own. At first I told myself it was exhaustion, a mind trick born of caffeine crashes and too many hours staring at headlights. But the longer I stared, the less room there was for denial. The handwriting was mine. Every curve, every imperfection, the looping R, the jagged tail of the T, even the way I never bothered to dot the I. There it was, carved deep into steel and paint like a wound in the stall door. And the message? I'm not alone in here. The words hit harder than any scream could have. My throat went dry, my pulse pounding like I'd run miles. I staggered back, one shoe squealing against the tile. That's when the lights overhead flickered, humming with a sound that belonged more to an angry hive than electricity. The shadows stretched and bent, too long, too eager. Then came the squeal of rusted hinges. A stall door opened by itself. The creak echoed like thunder in that cramped room, sharp and metallic. I couldn't breathe. The gap yawned wider, revealing nothing but dark. And yet it felt like something was standing there. The air shifted. Cold. Wrong. My skin prickled as I watched my own breath fog white. The scent of bleach was swallowed by something older, mildew, rotten, the copper sting of blood long dried. And then the sound began. Scratch. Scratch. Nails dragged across metal from inside the locked stalls. Not one stall, all of them. The rhythm fell into place. Tap, 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 tap. A code, Morse. Someone, something was spelling words from behind those thin barriers. I leaned in without meaning to, like the sound had hooked me. L-E-T. That was all I needed to hear. Every nerve screamed at me, run, now. But my legs wouldn't move. They felt glued to the tile, heavy as anchors. I tried to swallow, but my throat was a desert. My hands trembled like they didn't belong to me. The scratching grew faster, more frantic. A chorus now. Dozens of fingers clawing metal, messages overlapping, voices that weren't voices pressing against the inside of my skull. The last stall slammed shut. I jumped so hard my head cracked the wall behind me. Pain sharpened the panic, snapping me back. My body finally obeyed. I lunged for the door, hand closing around the knob. It didn't turn. Locked. From the outside, the buzzing light overhead dimmed until the room was almost black. A new sound filled the silence. Low breathing. Not mine. Close enough that I felt it stir the hair at the back of my neck. And then, from the stall with my handwriting, came a voice. My voice, whispering, "Don't leave me here again." The last stall door groaned shut like a coffin lid sealing forever. The sound ripped through the silence, metal grinding against metal, slow and merciless. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body was stone, rooted in that foul-smelling restroom while my mind screamed to run. Then I saw it. Not past tense, not graffiti that had been there for decades. This was happening now. Letters clawed themselves into the metal, as if gouged by invisible fingernails dragging with agonizing slowness. Curl by curl, line by line, the words appeared. Don't stop here at night. My stomach twisted into a knot. But it didn't stop there. Below it, new grooves cut deeper faster. And this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was my name, my full name. First, middle, last. Every syllable etched perfectly, as though the wall had been waiting to spell it out. That broke me. My knees buckled, palms slick with sweat. I staggered backward, slamming against the sink. The mirror rattled, cracked at the corner, and in that brief fracture of glass, I saw something behind me, just for a second. A figure. Not clear, not solid. A shadow in the shape of me. Taller, darker, its head tilted too far to one side like a corpse with a broken neck. And it was smiling. I spun. Nothing there. Just stalls. Just silence. Just the buzz of the dying bulb. And then, bang! One of the locked doors slammed open so hard it nearly tore from its hinges. Another bang shut. Then another. A chain reaction, stalls opening and closing with bone-rattling force until the whole restroom thundered like a war drum. The air pulsed. My ears rang. The temperature dropped so violently that ice spread across the mirrors, veins of frost racing in jagged patterns. My breath came in bursts, fogging thick, until I couldn't see the far wall. Through the mist, something stepped out of the last stall. At first, it was just a pair of hands, ashen, skeletal, fingernails broken and red. Then arms, then a face, pale as paper, features smeared like wet ink. The eyes, God, the eyes weren't eyes at all, just hollow sockets with a faint glow deep inside, like coals buried under ash. It stepped forward. My body screamed retreat, but the door behind me wouldn't budge. I clawed at the knob, hammered my fist, kicked until my toes throbbed. Nothing. The thing kept moving, dragging one leg like it had forgotten how to walk. Every step left streaks of dark water across the tiles, though the floor had been bone dry. When it opened its mouth, the sound wasn't human. A guttural moan, layered with whispers, my whispers. Every regret, every secret, every half-spoken prayer I'd ever choked out alone. And then, louder than all of them, a single command: stay. I realized then, this wasn't just a warning scratched on the stall. It was a sentence, and I was the prisoner. Panic ripped me loose. I bolted out the door, nearly tearing it off its hinges. The clerk at the counter barely looked up from his magazine as I sprinted past, fumbling with my keys. The night swallowed me whole. My hands shook so violently, I dropped the keys once, twice, before stabbing them into the ignition. The engine coughed awake, and I slammed my foot down, peeling out of the station. Tires screaming against the cracked asphalt. Headlights carved tunnels through the darkness, but my vision blurred. My chest heaved. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Every muscle in my body hummed with leftover terror, like I was still inside that restroom, trapped. I risked one glance in the rearview mirror. The gas station shrank in the distance, a sickly glow under the buzzing neon sign. But the restroom window, just before it slipped out of sight, burned faintly, a glow that wasn't electricity. It looked like candlelight, flickering, patient, watching. I nearly swerved off the road. I forced my eyes forward, whispering out loud just to hear a human voice. It's over, it's done, it's behind me. But the words felt fragile, lies that could collapse under their own weight. Mile after mile rolled beneath the tires. The highway was empty, the world too quiet, too still. My breathing slowed, but unease stayed welded to my ribs. At a red light in some nameless town, I caught it again. The mirror, my name. Not scratched into a stall this time, no. It was smeared across the inside of my rear window. Letters drawn with something wet. Letters that dripped. I whipped around, but the back seat was empty. No candlelight, no shadow figure, no broken body dragging across tiles. Just silence. Just me. I left the light running red, engine howling as I sped through intersections, past darkened storefronts and shuttered motels. I didn't care where I ended up, only that it was away from that station, away from that restroom. Hours later, the adrenaline thinned, leaving me hollow. I pulled into a diner at dawn, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and burnt coffee. The waitress asked if I was all right. I opened my mouth to say yes, but no sound came. My throat had sealed itself around the truth. Instead, I just nodded, sat down, tried to look normal, tried to look alive. When I went to the restroom there, I hesitated at the door. My reflection in the chrome handle was pale, sweating, eyes wide. I pushed inside anyway, telling myself this was different. Bright lights, fresh paint, clean tiles. But there, above the sink, scratched faintly into the mirror, were the words I thought I'd left behind. Don't stop here at night. And beneath it again, my name. The same looping R, the same crooked T, the same careless, absent dot. Like I'd been here before, like I'd never left. Later, I heard the story secondhand. The night clerk, the same one who didn't even look up when I ran past him, had gone in to clean the restroom after my stop. Routine, nothing unusual. But when he came out, he looked pale, like he'd swallowed ice. They say he wouldn't speak much about what he saw in there. Just muttered, "Not again." The place was spotless, he said. Bleach and rust smell gone, stalls shining like they'd been scrubbed down brand new. No graffiti, no names, no cries for help stretching across decades. The walls were blank, innocent, as if none of it had ever existed, except for one thing. On the last stall, carved so deep the grooves still bled flakes of paint, were 4 words: fresh, jagged, unmistakable. Don't stop here at night. And beneath it, no matter how many times the clerk swore he repainted, no matter how many coats of paint he rolled on, it came back. My name, scratched raw into the metal, letters forming again and again. I tried to forget, Tried to laugh it off. Just a trick of fatigue, I told myself. Just nerves, too many hours on the road. But sometimes in the quiet, I hear it. That faint rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Morse code on the inside of my skull. And I wonder if it followed me. If the warning on the walls isn't about that place at all, but about me, about what I've carried since I walked out of that door. So let me ask you this. If you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of highway, fuel light glowing red, and the only sign ahead flickers open in the dark, will you stop? Or will you keep driving before the walls remember your name too? And if you like this story, remember to hit that like button. It helps more than you know to grow this channel and keep these stories alive. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss the next one. Share this video with someone you think would dare to pull into that gas station at night. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Another story waits for you on your screen right now. I'll see you back here tomorrow. But until then, maybe check the writing on the walls next time you stop, just in case. Pool lights. They say a pool at night feels different, too still, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums against your skin. I was 17, a lifeguard at the town's community center, stuck with late shifts nobody else wanted. My flaw? I wasn't brave. I took the safe jobs, kept my head down, learned to count tiles for comfort. Watching an empty pool felt easy, until it didn't. On paper, it was a civic duty. Chlorine checks, tape the slips, sweep the deck. In practice, it was fluorescent flicker and the echo of my own whistle. The pool sat in a low, squat building behind the library, a rectangle of glass and concrete that smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and old sunscreen. Above it, the ceiling tiles were the right color of institutional beige to put you to sleep. Below, the water held a false kind of promise, a mirror that refused to return more than a pale blue glare. The town kids called the pool the lake in summer, which makes sense if you've ever seen a bunch of teenagers turn chlorinated rectangles into kingdoms. But after 9, the place dissolved into geometry, lanes, backstroke flags, a digital clock that glowed like a patient heart monitor. The night crew was me, the vending machine that never worked, and the skeleton crew of fluorescent bulbs. The first night it happened, I thought it was old wiring, a shutter in the lights, nothing more. I've worked with cheap municipal electrics. Light flicker is as common as algae. But the second night, the flicker came in patterns, like a person tapping the rim of a glass in Morse code, slow and deliberate. Pause, longer pause, pause. The reflection on the tile water broke into a stutter, as if someone below were nudging the surface to see if I was awake. There was no one else. The back door was locked. The clerk had gone home. I should have called facilities, filed a ticket for the morning. Instead, I stood at the edge with the whistle looped around my neck and felt the skin along my forearms crawl, that human little spark of animal chemistry which says don't. I told myself 1,000 sensible things, old ballast, condensation, your eyes playing tricks. I told myself I was being dramatic because a mixtape of horror movies had taught me how to be afraid. But there's a part of being 17 that reads signals differently. You mistake loneliness for courage, or courage for curiosity. I leaned over the pool, listening to the water breathe, and when the lights blinked again, 3 short, 2 long, I heard it with a certainty that scared me more than the flicker. It sounded like a name. Not mine, not yet, but close enough to the syllables that live in you like teeth. I clipped the whistle to my lips and blew once, a clean, professional note. A laugh, small and wrong, answered. Not from the locker room, not from the office, but from under the water, like someone had learned how to hum through a throat of tile. My head dialed back into myth and memory, drowned children and playground tales, the kind of small-town ghosts you teach one another over soda at midnight to scare each other into bravery. I walked away from the side to fetch a flashlight and, call it teenage superstition or a better sense of self-preservation, I told the empty pool out loud to stop being dramatic. It answered by making the lane marker ripple, slow as a finger passing under silk. That was the day being a bystander ended. I began to count differently after that, laps in my head, not of swim strokes, but of possibilities. Wiring, prank, animal, or something older, patient, that had learned the grammar of blinking lights and the cadence of a whistle. Nights lengthened into experiments. I watched the surface, cataloged the flash patterns, tapped the metal ladder to hear if it answered back. It never answered my voice, it answered the light. Once you start listening for the wrong things, the pool room rearranges itself. The fluorescent hum becomes conversation. Shadows take on the patient geometry of things that live beneath things. My safe job became a stakeout, a small teenage sentinel waiting for the world to explain itself. And when explanation did not come, curiosity, nastier and more honest than fear, pushed my hand toward the water. That's when the water did the unkind thing, when it winked and showed me that it knew how to wait. The first clear sign that waiting was not benign happened on the third week. The lights spelled something that was not a wiring fault and not a prank. They spelled a word. At first, I ignored it. Who cares if lights buzz and blink? But the pattern sharpened, cutting through the still water like signals meant for me alone. Short, long, stubborn, insistent. I leaned over the rail, knuckles pressed white, convinced my brain was inventing it, until the shadow appeared. It rose slowly, like something remembering how to take shape. A boy's outline, flat against the tiles, features pressed like a photograph beneath glass. His hair floated up in lazy strands, drifting as if the water were his sky. His face was pale, distorted by the blue glow, but his eyes, if they were eyes, were wide open, staring back. My stomach pitched. I swore it was a trick of reflection, except my coworker saw it too. He froze halfway across the deck, towel slung over his shoulder, and muttered a name I didn't know. When I asked, he told me in a whisper, "That's the kid, the one who drowned here years back." No one had told me that in training. No one said this pool had a ghost. The silence afterward was suffocating. The air thickened, heavy with chlorine and something sour underneath. The water lost its sparkle. It looked darker, murkier, like the shadow had spread through it. I backed away, but my coworker, older, cockier, with too much to prove, said we had to check. I begged him not to. My voice cracked, a sound I hated, but he was already peeling off his shirt, sneakers squeaking against wet tile. His grin was shaky, a mask that didn't fit. "It's just a reflection," he said. "You'll see." He dove. The splash echoed like glass shattering, loud in the cavernous room. Ripples rolled outward, breaking the false calm. I leaned forward, scanning the water, waiting for his head to surface. Seconds stretched. Then the pool lights flickered again, more urgent, a strobe that painted the water in violent bursts of blue and white. Through the flashes, I saw them. Hands. Not one pair, but many. Small, pale, reaching up from the depths, closing around his arms, his shoulders, dragging him down. I screamed. The sound bounced off the concrete walls, hollow and useless. I grabbed the rescue pole, jammed it toward the water, but the ripples fought me, the pole knocking against invisible resistance. My coworker's face broke the surface for a second, mouth wide, eyes panicked, and then he was yanked under again, swallowed whole. The water stilled. Perfect. Too perfect. The shadow boy was gone, but the tiles seemed darker, bruised with something that wasn't reflection. The whistle at my neck throbbed against my chest. I clutched it but couldn't blow. The silence wasn't waiting anymore. It was listening. And then, faint and deliberate, the lights blinked again. This time, I didn't need to guess what they were spelling. They spelled my name. The splash was sharp, then silence. No bubbles, no thrashing, nothing. Just stillness, like the pool itself had swallowed him in one clean gulp. I leaned over the edge, my eyes burning against the glow of the lights, searching for even a ripple. What I saw wasn't my coworker. The figure below spread wide, arms opening like a curtain, and it swallowed him whole. A shadow boy with impossible reach, his body dissolving into the dark as though the water itself obeyed him. My stomach knotted. I blew my whistle until my lungs tore, the shrill cry cutting across tile and concrete, but the pool didn't answer. It only stared back. I screamed his name, kicked at the water, slammed the rescue pole into the surface like I could churn him back up, but the pool was flat, too flat. The ripples died in seconds, surface glassing over, returning to its unnatural calm. My coworker was gone. Then, out of that dead calm, something broke the surface. Not him, his whistle. Floating gently, almost politely, as if it had been placed there. The silver chain caught the pool light, and it drifted toward me, bumping the tiles at my feet. I froze, because that whistle was dripping wet, and the tiles, bone dry. Something shifted under the water. I felt it before I saw it, the way you feel a storm pressing against your chest. The lights flickered again, rapid fire, a strobe that made the room feel like it was tearing apart. And in those flashes, I saw faces. Not one boy, dozens. Mouths gaping, eyes wide and milk-colored, bodies pressed against the underside of the surface like flies against glass. Children, all watching, all waiting. The sound came next, a low hum deep enough to rattle the lane dividers vibrating through the metal ladder, climbing into my bones. A chant, wordless but rhythmic, timed with the blinking lights. The message wasn't Morse anymore. It was clearer, louder. They wanted me. I staggered backward, my sneakers squealing on the wet deck. But every step back, the lights flared brighter, hotter, like the pool was dragging the room closer. My shadow bent unnaturally long across the water, stretching out until it touched theirs. The whistle at my neck grew hot, burning. I ripped it off, but it stuck to my fingers, clinging like tar. And then the light spelled it again, unmistakable this time. My name, glowing across the water in letters only I could read. The choice hit me like a wave. Run and leave him down there forever, or dive and risk joining the shadows. My legs shook, my chest heaved, but the pool was no longer asking, it was demanding. The water rippled without wind, rising as though it meant to climb out and claim me itself. So I did the only thing I could. I jumped. The water closed over my head like a door slamming shut. And for the first time, I realized the truth. This pool wasn't a place to swim. It was a mouth. And it had been hungry for a long, long time. I ran to call for help, the whistle still searing my palm. But when I looked back, the water was calm again. Too calm. Clear enough to see the bottom. No bubbles, no body, no shadow. Just the faint shimmer of the pool lights, still twitching in that deliberate code. They pulsed faintly like a dying heartbeat, daring me to believe it had all been real. When I finally stumbled outside, the night air hit me like a slap. Crickets chirped. Cars rolled past on the empty street. The world was normal, insultingly normal, while I felt split wide open inside. I dialed the manager's number with trembling fingers, but by the time he arrived, the pool was back to its innocent municipal self. Tiles gleaming, water glassy, the whole place smelling faintly of chlorine and lemon. He didn't believe me. Not really. He nodded at my story, frowned at the missing lifeguard, and muttered something about kids sneaking in after hours, about accidents. But when he looked into the pool, he didn't keep his eyes there long. I noticed that. His jaw flexed, his hands fidgeted, and then he locked the doors without another word. By dawn, a taped-up sign dangled across the glass, closed for maintenance. Workers arrived in the morning with hoses and pumps, their chatter echoing in the empty chamber. I stood off to the side, still shaking, watching the water drop inch by inch. I waited for something, anything to float up. A body, a shoe, a scrap of cloth. But the pool gave back nothing. It only surrendered its silence. As the level dropped lower, the air turned strange, damp, metallic, like the inside of a cave. The smell clung to my throat. One of the workers muttered it reminded him of old stone. Another shivered and spat, said it felt like being watched. Nobody laughed at him. By noon, the pool was bare, stripped down to bone-white tiles, dry, lifeless. Yet in the deepest corner near the drain, something remained. A single whistle. Not mine, his. Resting there like it had been placed with care. Still dripping, though the tiles were dry. I crouched close enough to see my reflection bent across it. My own face staring back, distorted. My eyes wide the way his must have been in those last seconds. I wanted to reach for it, to snatch it up and prove I hadn't imagined everything. But something in me refused. My hand froze inches above it, like touching it would mean choosing to follow. The workers didn't notice. They packed up, whistling, actual whistling, tuneless and light, as if mocking me. The sound twisted my stomach. I slipped out before anyone could stop me. That night, the community center was dark, windows boarded, doors chained. But when I passed on my bike, I swore I heard it. Faint, hollow, drifting through the cracks. A whistle, calling me back. And in the darkness, the lights still flickered. The tiles were bone dry. Every inch scrubbed clean, the kind of sterile white that makes you doubt yourself, makes you think maybe none of it ever happened. Except for one thing. At the deep end, near the drain, lay his whistle, still dripping, fresh water sliding into the cracks, long after the pool had been emptied. I stood there for a long time, longer than I should have, my breath fogging in that echo chamber of tile and silence. I should have picked it up, turned it in, closed the chapter. But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew it wasn't an object anymore. It was an invitation. The town tried to forget. They locked the doors. They shut the lights off. Kids whispered about why the community pool closed for repairs and never reopened. Nobody asked me directly, though some looked at me sideways, like I was carrying something contagious. And maybe I was. At night, I'd lie awake replaying it. The lights blinking, the hum under the water, the way his face broke the surface for just a second before the shadows pulled him under. I told myself 100 lies to survive it, that he'd escaped, that he was out there hiding. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the suction on my skin, the pull of that dark mouth waiting below. It wasn't done with me. I changed after that. Not braver, not exactly, but raw, stripped of the illusion that safety is real. I quit the job. Couldn't step near a pool without my hands shaking. And yet some nights, I catch myself standing outside the boarded windows, listening. The hum is still there, faint, like it's calling my name. The whistle never dried. I know because I went back, just once. Slipped through a gap in the boards to see if it was still there, and it was. Waiting, wet, no dust, no decay, as if the pool itself kept it alive. So let me ask you, if you ever see pool lights flickering in strange patterns after dark, will you lean closer to read the message? Or will you run before the water decides it wants you to? Because me, I'm not sure I'll keep running. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like this video. It helps the channel grow and reach more people who crave a good scare. Subscribe so you never miss another tale waiting in the dark, and share this one with someone you know would dare to read the signs. Thanks for watching, and remember, there's another story waiting for you on the screen right now. I'll see you tomorrow.